Serious people who killed in self-defense. What's your story? I was back at my home country during a civil war. Some people started going to random villages and draft males and use them as soldiers. They eventually came to our house and took me a 12-yo and my brother a 10-yo. It was a few hours drive until we eventually reached a checkpoint where we would be stationed. Them being animals, one of the commanders took me and my brother to an abandoned building close to that checkpoint and then took off his gear and was trying to rape my brother. I was scared and in a panic I grabbed a decent-sized rock and hit him in the back of the head before he can do anything to my brother. He fell and I got on top of him and smashed his face over and over and over with the rock until it was caved in. Me and my brother then ran from that abandoned spot through some mountains and kept running until we reached a city nearby. We went to a nearby mosque, washed the blood off of us and told the sheikh in that area to help us and that we were from said village. To our luck, he was a decent human being and returned us back to our village. A few years later we moved to the US. My brother killed himself 2 years ago and I am still in school. Neither me or my brother told anyone about what happened in that spot. All they know is that we escaped. I was with an abusive ex who would come home drunk every night. One night, we had a fight. I had my phone on vibrate and that obviously meant I was sleeping with other people behind his back. He left for a while and came home drunker than I'd ever seen him. He wasn't making coherent sentences, but he lunged at me and wrapped his hands around my neck and sat on my chest. I thought I was going to die. I had done some BJJ when I was younger and managed to pull me legs up under his crotch, and then with everything I had, I pushed him off me. He hit his head on the sharp corner of a table we had in the living room and went still. I figured he had been knocked out, so I went outside and called the police. I was gonna put his ass in jail. I had the deepest purple bruises in perfect fingerprint form around my neck. He would have gone to jail. I smoked a cigarette outside. Walked back in after I calmed my nerves just to make sure he wasn't awake and coming for me. He had a huge pool of blood under him. It was almost black looking, so I stood there trying to figure out WTF I was looking at. Put 2 and 2 together and the rest is history. Years of therapy. Self-defense plea. Open and shut. Some guy tries to mug me in the street. He tells me to give him my wallet. I pulled my concealed carry and shot him in the leg, fatal, and pelvis as I pulled up my gun. I grab his gun, a snub-nose revolver, out of his hand and see the chamber. It was empty. That f***ed me up for years. From some of the comments I see, I should point out the revolver was still in his waistband, with his hand on the grip, when I pulled my weapon. I'm sorry you had to go through that. However, he was pointing a firearm at you. Firearms usually have bullets in them. It was justified. I was heading home when I was attacked by 2 guys. They followed me when I got off the metro. My first memory of the attack is being on the ground and getting kicked in the head and ribs over and over. I was disoriented and it took me a few moments to realize what was happening and that I was being robbed. All that was going through my mind was don't resist. Don't fight back. Let them hit you and take your backpack, you can get another one. All the stuff your parents and movies teach you. The guy hitting me had one of those metal collapsible batons. The other was just watching from 10 feet away. The beating stopped when the guy with the baton tried to take my boots. I made eye contact with the other guy and at that moment he said "F it" and pulled out a knife. I decided to fight back. The rest is a blur. I remember a few details, but I have no idea what order they happened in. I remember booting the guy closest to me in the face and getting on top of him. I managed to get the baton away and started hitting them with it. I went for the head till they put their arms up, then to the body until they put their arms down. Back and forward until the one guy went down. Then back to the other guy till he went down. Then back to the other as he got back up. Next thing I remember was waiting for the cops to get there. Some people close by had called them and were waiting with me. I don't remember feeling myself being stabbed or cut in any way until the people waiting with me pointed it out. There was a small part of my intestine bulging out and I had some major lacerations on my arms, neck and shoulder. Over 60 stitches and a major concussion, but I was out of the hospital the next morning. To shorten the story a bit, the end result was one of them died and the other was arrested and spent a few months in the hospital before prison. The lack of any guilt over the situation is what truly was the most troubling. Everyone kept asking me how I was doing mentally. No one believed me when I told them I felt fine. Someone before me on here out it best. Feeling guilty for not feeling guilty. I have a feeling many of the others on here can agree with me on what it was like after. My entire outlook on life had changed and I suddenly couldn't care less about any of the trivial stresses I used to care about. Am I the only one or do others share in my disposition? This was a few years ago. I was going back to home after a visit to my bank. I realized that someone was following me. I tried to ignore it first but he kept following me. I changed my direction so that I don't go near my home. Then to finally confirm whether it was real I pretended to tie my shoelaces. The guy took this as an opportunity and lunged at me. I realized what was happening just in time. I stood up hurriedly. He bumped into me and I fell down again. I thought I was done for. But the guy fell down too on the road and got run over. I have a fear of roads ever since then. Even when I am driving. I know it doesn't make sense that I would develop a phobia of roads after this. But that's what happened. This was a very traumatic experience for me. I had recently turned 18, graduated from high school, and started college. My college wasn't in the best part of town, but I ignored the warnings and didn't pay much attention to my surroundings. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and I was walking back to my dorm from a friend's dorm that was across campus. Everything was regular until I started hearing footsteps on the sidewalk behind me. When I looked back, no one was there, but it still put me on edge. I kept walking, but I kept hearing the footsteps. Every time I turned around I couldn't see anyone, and I was starting to get scared. Finally I turned around and saw a man walking further behind me. He was dressed in dark clothes and had strange gait. As soon as I saw him he started running at me, and he was fast. I grabbed my pepper spray from my purse. I was smart enough to carry it on me and sprayed it directly into his eyes. He yelled, but it didn't stop him for long, so I ran. I knew I could outrun him for a while because I was a state track runner all through high school. I could tell I was getting tired, but I didn't know what else to do. I was on the edge of the campus, and part of nudged right up to a dense forest. That's the part one was on. I couldn't see him, but I could hear his heavy footsteps as he tried to catch up to me. I saw a dead tree that was loosing branches left and right. I picked a pretty big one and dragged it to the middle of the sidewalk. Then I took a good-sized one that was pretty heavy, but I could still lift it easily. With my branch in hand I hid behind a tree. Soon after I saw him. He was still running fast, and coming right up on the branch. Just as I planned, he tripped, and I saw his shocked, sick face as he fell to the ground. I ran out from my tree and started pummeling him over the head with my branch. I saw blood, but I ran off. Once I got at my dorm I took a second to catch my breath. And then I dialed 911. I explained to them what happened as the operator calmed me down, and signaled for an ambulance and some police. I learned later that the man died en route to the hospital, but also that he had been mugging and beating young women for ages as they walked alone in the dark. The police knew what he was doing, but they could never figure out his identity. I had to go to therapy for ages, but I'm semi-okay now, and I never walk alone in the dark. Not my story, but someone who I know. At the time, my friend was single and an officer in the military. He was coming from work, and when he walked into his house he noticed a pile of his belongings in the center of the floor and his sliding glass door broken and in the open position. He checked his closet and his guns were missing. They were not in a safe. He got on the phone with 911 and was telling them what had happened and how his house looked while checking each room. His AR-15 was still behind the door, as the robber had evidently missed it. So he chambered around while waiting on the police. While he was still on the phone with 911 he saw a man jump over his privacy fence with a plastic bag in his hand. Evidently the robber was coming back to get the items he had piled up in the living room floor. Knowing the robber had already stolen some of his weapons, and not knowing if the robber had them on him or had stashed them somewhere, he raised the rifle as the robber came in through the open sliding glass door and yelled for the robber to get on the ground. The robber made a move with his right hand towards the small of his back, and my friend opened fire at less than 10 meters, hitting the robber center mass 3 times. As he came over to the robber he noticed that one of his stolen handguns had fallen from the robber's waist. The robber asked him, "Why'd you kill me, man?" and expired on the spot. The shooting was ruled justified. The robber had just recently been released from prison for burglary and had been living with his grandmother. who had a house in the neighborhood. I asked my friend if he felt bad about it, and he told me he didn't feel bad at all about the shooting, but he did feel bad about not having all of his guns in a safe, as not having them secured led to his decision to shoot, knowing the robber had some of his guns. Never before have I seen this many deleted replies. Alright. This is gonna get buried, but whatever. Strap yourselves in because this is a ride of emotions. My dad is a security guard. He's very good at his job and has recently been asked to work in Japan for a music festival as a bodyguard of the artist organizing it. Back in 2016 he kicked a crackhead out of a concert for, being jacked up on crack. The guy waited outside and followed my dad home after the concert. Being so damn high he obviously didn't think and just wanted revenge. When he got my address he left, but came back every so often waiting for a time that none of us were home. He snuck into the crawl space of my roof and lived there for what was apparently 2 weeks before my parents and brother were out at my brother's soccer game. So I'm home alone and bored, and I hear some banging in the roof. I didn't know there was a dude up there at the time, obviously. So I opened up the roof to find out what it was. The second I opened it he pounced on me. I kicked him off as soon as possible and ran down the hallway. He was a hell of a lot faster than me, and as I realized this the adrenaline finally kicked in and I decided to stay and fight. I turned around, just in time to see him pull out a knife and go for my back. I put out my hand and the knife went straight through, but I didn't feel it. The adrenaline was pumping. In a pure moment of fear, rage, and defense, I ripped my hand away, punched him with my left hand and ripped out the knife with my right. He ran at me again and I felt as if time slowed down. I held out the knife and happened to hit him in the throat. He suffocated about a minute later. I immediately called emergency services and 3 minutes later an ambulance and 2 cop cars showed up. The cops didn't arrest me as there was proof it was self-defense and that he was under the influence of cocaine, so I was free to go to the hospital. The knife had barely missed my bones, but it was too close for stitches, so I had to have my hand sort of glued together with a type of biodegradable, non-toxic superglue.